Thank you, Senator. If I may, I'll answer the second one first and then get back to the first one. In terms of the Senator Booker's question about daytime truck traffic being shifted to the daytime hours, FMCSA's study, it's commonly known as the Restart study, issued in January of 2014, January of this year. I would point the committee to figures 5 and 6. Figures 5 and 6, and it's very difficult to see, but they demonstrate that the 2 or more night sleepers under the new Restart compared to the 1-night sleepers, it demonstrates, those two charts, that the truck traffic is more distributed through the daytime hours between 8 a.m. and approximately 8 p.m. at night. So in FMCSA's own study, we've also provided some data, some information to the administration taking a look at that. Now, with respect to your first question, and there are a lot of ways to answer that because there are a lot of things going on in the industry. I'll address it from the technology standpoint. There are lane departure warning systems. There are collision mitigation, forward collision mitigation systems. There's active braking systems. And more recently, and very recently, these onboard camera systems that are not designed to view the truck driver in a negative way. It's designed to capture the environment of what's going on in near crashes and crash events to determine what happened, whether that's to coach to the professional driver or in a lot of cases to get the professional driver off of the hook given what's happened. And those are improving safety. There's demonstrated evidence that those systems work in addition to all of these other sort of vehicle-based technologies that alert the driver and so forth.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Ayotte.
I want to thank the chairman. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Osheki, in terms of, I really appreciate the hard work that our truck drivers do. And I think it's important to point out that I've met a lot of them in my state, and a lot of them own their own business and are small businesses and independent operators as well that are working pretty hard. And they're competing against rail and other things. So it's an important job, and it's highly competitive. And frankly, one of the concerns that they've raised with me is that it's becoming more and more costly to own your own business and to be a smaller operator in this context, with not only some of the things that are being issued that we're talking about today, but also some of the new technology that's being required. Wouldn't you agree it's harder for the smaller operators in this context?
I think it is when there are mandated technologies. I think that's the case. Much of what I was speaking about was voluntarily adopted technologies and incentives to drive that voluntary adoption. Because, and folks who have worked around NHTSA and FMCSA for years know that it takes many, many years. In fact, it takes decades when you implement a new mandated technology and new equipment, it literally takes 2 to 3, sometimes 4 decades for the entire fleet to turn over. So incentives to drive voluntary adoption is one way to do that. Now, I will sort of put an asterisk on, we do support the mandated electronic logging devices, and there may be some difference in the industry on that point, but the cost is coming down on those.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Administrator Farrow, I know that you're leaving soon, so thank you for all your work at the agency. Appreciate it. When you last appeared before this committee on the hours of service rule, you had testified that based on the FMCSA study that essentially there was evidence that more trucks, larger trucks, would be on the road during the daytime hours because of the new hours of service rules. Do you dispute that?
I spoke to the logic that we use to analyze what that might be, looking at the 15% impact and identifying that by virtue of the logical analysis, about 250,000.
Right. So by logic, by logic, we're going to have more large trucks on the road during the daytime.
Well, in fact, the follow-up point on that is that 250,000 is barely a drop in the bucket when you look at the 10 million vehicles operating on our system.
Have we fully analyzed? As I understand it, we've not fully analyzed, and that's one of the purposes of the Collins study, is to have a full analysis of what will be the impact during daytime hours in terms of truck traffic. And as you and I have talked about in the past, we already do have evidence that more accidents occur during the daytime hours because of the congestion that is natural during the daytime hours in and of itself. And so I think one of the things, I know that the chairman and others have said that the study of this has been robust, it's been scientific, but it strikes me that we haven't answered a fundamental question that is important in terms of people's safety, which is if we change the restart rules in the way that they've been proposed, how many more trucks will be on the road during those daytime hours? What will be the safety impact of having those trucks, more of them on the road during the daytime hours? And to delay the rule while we understand that question, to me, seems logical, because if we know that there's more congestion during the daytime and more likely evidence that there are more accidents during that period, wouldn't we want to know before we go forward with this exactly what the public safety impact is about the added truck traffic during that period? It seems to me we've all been talking about science and data, but it's important for us to have that science and data before we implement a very significant rule that could, in fact, we don't know, have the unintended consequence of actually creating more public safety issues. So I think that's really where the Collins Amendment is coming from, and I fully support it. I think it makes logical sense. And the feedback that I've heard from this rule, as we've talked about before, I know that the Collins Amendment also will analyze the economic impacts of this rule. But I know we've heard a lot of discussion today about why don't we just go forward with the rule? Well, this is a fundamental question that we should have answered, it seems to me, for the American people before we go forward with a pretty significant rule change.
If I might comment, just for purposes of clarification, the final rule was issued in December of 2011 and went into effect a year ago. So the full rule is underway today.
Right, so I want to correct. So it should,
Okay.
I don't know why we went forward with a rule without having those questions answered. And it seems to me that the Collins Amendment, from having received the feedback of the concerns that people have that are legitimate concerns, strikes the right balance, because it suspends the rule until we know the answer to that very important question of how much more daytime traffic, what will be the impact in terms of potential accidents during the daytime. And, to me, the fact that we issued this rule before we actually had the clear answers to those very important questions is something that shouldn't have happened. So I think what the Collins Amendment does is really restart where we should be until we have those answers. And if the answers are that isn't a public safety impact, then you certainly are in a position where the rule can be reissued.
And thank you for clarifying. There is a public safety impact of rolling back this rule. The rule today, that's in place today, based on the scientific evidence, based on analysis, based on an enormous amount of public input, is projected, is currently expected to be saving lives, reducing crashes, and that's based on the health benefits, the analysis through the sleep lab studies, and the field study that Dave Osheki mentioned actually was referencing traffic patterns prior to July of 2013, as Congress had mandated we analyze.
When you were last, and I know my time is up, but when you were last before this committee and I asked you about the field study in particular, and the number of drivers that were analyzed, as I understand it, my recollection is it was 21 or so over, you can tell me, 106 drivers of the reversed over 21 hours.
106.
And so we think about the number of drivers on the road across this country, 106 drivers over a 21-day period, correct?
That's correct.
And so, I'm doing this from the top of my head, I remember it, but that's not that many when you think about how many drivers are on the road. But most importantly, what I wanted to point out is when you were last before this hearing, you had agreed and you had said to me when we had this discussion about the study that your agency was constrained from doing the kind of broader naturalistic analysis that they are going to be doing going forward.
That's right.
So if you were constrained in doing that kind of analysis, I think one thing that we are in agreement around this room is that the Collins study, as proposed, is quite comprehensive. And this would allow us to have this information to understand the full impact of particularly the daytime traffic as a result of this rule. And and to really suspend what I think is a dramatic, I know for my constituents, I mean, I've said before, not only have I heard from truck drivers, but I've heard from wholesalers of groceries that this is going to cost them millions and millions of dollars, and they're concerned that it'll actually add to the impact of potential safety concerns during the day, that we need to understand these answers. And so I want to just express that I appreciate Senator Collins' leadership on this. I think her amendment makes a lot of sense, and it's unfortunate that we didn't have this information before the rule was actually issued and implemented.